So I'm going to just ask a couple of questions on the standby charge, if and I recognize that, I don't know whether you both have farms, you're going to have more CHP.
We do.
But so they're applicable, I think, to all three utilities. But what we've heard is that they're hard to determine on the part of a potential customer, and that they're erratic in that, 1 year it might be one thing, and then all of a sudden there could be a spike for unknown reasons. That they're not when they're established, they're not predictable enough for them to make a 20-year business decision, which is the cost of, building a building in the case of CHP. Farms, I'm not as sure, what the long term or what the, how long out they need to know to make a decision. But I would assume it's not you don't buy a farm anticipating you're going to shut it down in 4 years. You also have a long term investment. So how do we? I guess how would you address that? What is the problem in doing a more predictable standby charge over a period of time so that we could develop these very important clean energy sources, on a more, more prolific basis, I guess.
All right, so I think Chair Zilberman in her discussion talked a lot about some of what they're thinking on a forward-looking basis with REV and how to try to value energy produced at the grid edge more accurately, and that's what we're looking to do in REV. But if we think about standby charges today as how they exist, they're essentially divided into two component pieces for a CHP. One component piece is essentially a reservation payment. It's the contract demand. It's how much utility system needs to be held in place, essentially in reserve, for the CHP customer to back up their facilities during the peak periods, Monday to Friday, during the operating hours, 8 to 10 p.m. So when you look at that period of time, how much utility infrastructure needs to be there if the CHP facility comes offline. The second piece is as-used demand, which essentially looks on a daily basis at how much draw the individual customer basically has. The contract demand is essentially set based on the load of the facility and what the load would be if the generator was to come offline. How much extra capacity are we reserving for the benefit of that CHP customer, and how much should they pay for that? And then the as-used demand can vary depending on the performance of the generator associated with that CHP facility. If it trips off a lot during high load periods, during the peak periods, the customer would pay for that as-used demand as they are imparting load on the system at that point in time during the high load periods. That's not the case for nights and weekends, because during those periods they can come off and perform maintenance. Essentially what they're paying for is the systems to be there during peak periods. So there is some variability associated with the as-used demand depending on the performance of the CHP unit. There's also the ability to earn performance credits and essentially reduce your contract demand through multiple summers of good performance during the peak load periods. So if a CHP unit can perform well during those high load periods when the system is essentially delivering its maximum demand, so that you would need to size the system up for additional load, if a CHP unit performs well through multiple cycles, it was 1 year when first introduced and it'll be a 2-year period, with some allowance for the unit to come offline 3 instances of trip out for 5 days. If you perform well during that period with the allowance for an occasional trip out, you can reduce your contract demand. So there is some volatility in those things, but they're really trying to fully recognize both the cost imparted by the CHP on the system and allocate those fairly across the customer class, and then recognize the variability of performance and reward the good performance.
So in your catchment area, you have a lot of commercial development, or large CHP for, potential commercial development, and those are not. There's no net metering for, commercial CHP. Is there consideration or a different standby charge, because obviously you're not paying, net metering costs the utility, right? So is there a differentiation you make because of that?
So for a
Establishing, I mean, I guess I don't understand how, I understand what you said, about establishing standby charges, but, are there considerations because it's, like the PSC is ultimately going to require you to consider, because there's going to be a consideration based on the fact that it's renewable, that it's clean, it's, those kinds of factors are going to get fed into their long-term look at how you establish a standby charge. So, are any of those factors considered? I don't expect environmental because that's just not the way you operate right now, but, but you will have to because of the requirement of utility to, purchase renewables. Is there any consideration to other factors besides just ratepayer-based factors that you're considering when you make those charges?
I think in the development of the rate, and the rate is developed and then filed and approved by the Public Service Commission. So those rates are essentially approved through the commission. In the development of the rate, as standby rates exist today, they are really looking at the combination of who imparts the cost and how to fairly and adequately recover those costs required across the customer class. And that's consistent rate-making principles applied in the state of New York and how these rates were developed. As we think about how to engage CHP for the other benefits that it potentially brings, we have other methods that we're currently using to do that. So, for example, in the BQDM area, load area, which is in Assemblymember Walker's area, we are currently looking to engage customers who would like to put in CHP, and how can we incentivize them to do that. Most of those incentives today through BQDM are actually being done through a direct incentive where we try to reduce the customer's capital cost to procure the equipment. So we essentially look, can we give you an incentive payment to reduce your upfront costs as opposed to a change in the actual rate. Now, as rate structures are looked at under REV, there may be evolution of that. But under the current process, if I can find, for example, SUNY Downstate, if they were interested in putting in CHP or another large facility, we'd like to work with them on how we can make that happen and what incentive can we give them to reduce their upfront capital costs so they could put that CHP in.
And what about the volatility of the rates? The fact that they vary, and are a little unpredictable in terms of that problem. So, going forward for a farm or going forward for a business, and they need some predictability of what they're going to pay annually, that volatility is a problem in terms of putting in that very expensive resource. So, I recognize that rates are, every time you bring a rate case, you're going to change that maybe as well. I don't know, whether standby charges are considered part of a rate case when you bring it.
Standby charges are part of rates, part of the rate structure we file each year. The rates themselves, and one of the principles the Commission establishes with rate making is a principle of gradualism. So generally the underlying rate is not shifting dramatically rate case to rate case. There are sometimes adjustments in how things are applied based on a lot of input from interveners and the CHP community being one who's heavily involved in intervening on behalf of how we establish standby rates with a lot of discussion. But I think the volatility that end-use customers are expressing really has to do with the performance of their machines during the load periods. So if you have volatility of performance, if the machine is available or then unavailable during essentially both the contract demand or the as-used demand periods, that will cause volatility to essentially what they're being charged, because they are imparting volatile loads on the system, causing cost, and then that is recovered through the rate, and that's the structure of the rate.
So I'm going to take a break and let my colleagues ask questions and maybe reserve the right to come back. Okay.
I wanted to ask, thank you. Mr. Gavin, you mentioned in your testimony that solar energy is rapidly growing across upstate, and thanks in large part to the federal and state incentives and utility support, and that solar facilities represent 88% of interconnected systems and 93%, I think you said, for proposed systems. That's upstate. What's happening downstate, particularly in low-income Black and Latino neighborhoods?
I really don't have a feel for downstate. We cover, upstate, so.
So you don't cover anything
No.
Downstate.
Probably, that's Con Ed
That's
service,
probably
yeah, it's
Con Ed.
probably my,
So,
so
well,
for,
I'll
for
give the
New York
answer.
City and Westchester County, our service territory, Con Ed service territory, we have about 8,400 solar photovoltaic installations representing about 105 megawatts. There are about 230 or so CHP installations representing about 160 megawatts. They are distributed through the service territory, with more of the rooftop solar photovoltaic being in residential areas, Staten Island, Westchester County, and more of the kind of like warehouse-sized, larger installations being in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. Actually, in the Bronx, we have one of the largest solar photovoltaic installations on a network system covering an entire rooftop of a large warehouse.
But in particular, what about in places like East New York, Brownsville, Harlem?
So East New York, particularly East New York, we've had a very active program there as part of the BQDM program where we're
What is it
able
called?
to BQDM, or Brooklyn Queens Demand Management. It is a fairly large project. We are looking to engage customer resources to defer the construction of a substation to increase supply in the area. Brooklyn's gone through real gentrification, and we've seen load growth in Brooklyn, and that load pocket, the Brownsville substation, is reaching its capacity. So we're looking to engage customer resources to defer the construction of that station. And we've had a number of projects in that area that are engaging the community on how we can deploy resources. I think one of the best examples is Marcus Garvey Houses on
Both of us have
Yep.
that.
And that project's a great project. It's low-income housing development, private ownership. They're putting solar photovoltaic on the roof of the building, so across the full. It's a low-rise development. I think it's a two-story building spanning the better plot of a square block and a half of Brooklyn. So they're putting solar photovoltaic on the roof. They're also putting a battery storage at the location and a fuel cell.
Right. So you know what I've done in East New York when I deal with developers, particularly in that whole Gateway area. We've had solar panels on all the Elton Street corridor.
Yep.
You know, right out there, solar panels on all the tops of the building, and also the Dumont Green project. They made a big deal over that, had commercials. But I'm just concerned about how we're approaching that. And then you mentioned gentrification. Were you connecting gentrification with bringing in these energy services?
I think I'm connecting gentrification to load growth, and load growth, which is a good thing in general. When you
But we have to have gentrified. We have to have white people moving in the neighborhood before
I don't
we
think
can get
gentrification
services.
means necessarily
Yes,
any.
it does. Yes, it does.
Maybe I used the wrong term
No,
because
no,
a lot of
use
these
the right
neighborhoods.
term. I just wanted to get more information on it. Use the very right term, because somehow people feel that unless we gentrify, because you know gentry means elite. I mean, the word literally means upper class elite, and they used to say regentrification, bringing back the upper class, the elites, and even in Mayor de Blasio's housing, so-called affordable housing program for East New York, it's bringing in on the north side. We've kept the south side of East New York real affordable, but on the north side, he's bringing in like 80% of the new housing is for people making 80% of the AMI and up, which is about $64,000 and up. 50% of it is for those making over $100,000. And when you look at those income range, the AMI for East New York is $34,000 for a family of four. So if 6,000 units are coming in and 50% of them, 3,000, are at market, and with incomes over 100, 150,000, that's basically going to be a large white community coming in. Now, they don't like to talk like that. They'll use other language, but that's going to be that. And also 50% of the so-called affordable share, 3,000, well, 30% of that is 80% of the AMI, which is $64,000 for a family of four. New York City's AMI is 84, 86,000. So the reason why I'm concerned about that, because sometimes when we talk to people and we engage agencies, it's almost like we got to be gentrified before we get certain services. And then our people are noticeably neglected from a lot of these services and these new energy sources and solar and wind and all of this. And once we're gentrified, then all of a sudden the concern for the services, bike lanes and all kinds of other things happen in a bagel shop. So I'm just concerned about that gentrification not be connected to whether or not we're going to get these kinds of services.
I think I might have used the wrong term in that, and with a lack of understanding of the true meaning of the terms. Thank you for the explanation. Within the East New York, Brownsville load pocket area, the entire area, we are looking to engage customer-sided resources to the degree possible to defer the construction of a substation that would cost about $1.2 billion by working with the entire community on methods to deploy customer-sided resources, including solar, storage, CHP, in ways that defers the investment that would be required to reinforce a very large substation in central Brooklyn and Queens. And we're trying to do that in a way that's cost efficient for all customers involved.
Thank you.
I do have a question. Thank you. So I have to say that I've been very engaged with Con Edison and with many of the community partners as it relates to the BQDM. And from each and every one of the conversations that I've had as it relates to BQDM, most of the emphasis on solar or any other sorts of renewable energy options have not been located within the Brownsville and East New York community. In fact, most of what has been deployed is changing of light bulbs. And it's almost to the point where it's like insulting, in that we have to contribute such a large portion in terms of reducing the load that that's about as much as we've been able to get so far. So I would like to see what the plan is as it relates to communities where Assemblyman Barron and I both co-represent. And also, I'd like to commend you on the work that you've done as it relates to looking to deploy CHP within our hospital, because we know at Brookdale Hospital there was a severe compromise to the load or their ability to pull on the load. They do want to do CHP, but Con Edison has not come to the table with real ability to be able to make this a true reality. We know this is a hospital that has some depleting resources, and the state has really been the one that's been keeping it up. And without a real commitment to making sure that CHP is actually a reality there from Con Edison, I don't think it'll ever happen. And one of the things that I want to note is that we had such a severe deficit on our load that when there was an outage at Brookdale, it turned off our chillers to the point where we almost had to evacuate the hospital. And that's the only hospital that covers my area, Assemblyman Barron's area, as well as many of our other colleagues. So it's a critical piece of infrastructure in a critical location, which is right across the street, really, from from the substation. So I really implore you to make a better faith effort in order to employ real CHP there. But not just there. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've been doing with NYCHA, since we have such a large NYCHA infrastructure? And one of the things that we know, or I understand, is that during peak hours in summer months that we have to turn down some of the load coming into the NYCHA developments, which troubles the proper and efficient running of its elevators. So can you talk to me a little bit about what your work is with NYCHA?
Okay. So I think Brookdale, we continue to work with Brookdale. I've been out there myself several times meeting. My staff has been meeting with them, trying to figure out the best way forward for them and what we can do to help facilitate what they're looking to do. I'm not sure that any utility would be in a position to fully pay for a CHP system, but we are looking to provide the maximum incentive possible, because that's really what we're doing as part of BQDM, is providing incentives for customers to be able to reduce their capital cost to move forward on projects that make economic sense, ultimately to put in CHP or other resources. So, and we will continue working with them.
What's the total amount of the investment that you're willing to make within this particular area?
The total for the BQDM project?
Yes.
Total for BQDM, the total substation, if we had built the substation required, it was approximately about $1 billion substation investment over multiple years. As part of BQDM, we are looking to engage about $200 million $150 million of that is customer-side resources. To do that, to defer the construction out about
So
10
it's
years.
not $250 million, it's $150 million?
It's 150 worth of customer-side engagement and 50 of non-traditional utility solutions. These are things like battery storage projects that will be able to site larger battery storage to unlock the potential of and firm up renewable energy sources. So it's 150 for the portfolio of customer-side solutions, and in that we are looking to maximize the value of that and how many megawatts can we achieve in demand reduction.
So do you know what happened to the other $50 million? Because from what I understood, that the approval from the PSC was for $250 million. Was that reduced?
My understanding it was two. If I have my numbers wrong, I apologize. I'll back check those and get back to you. But nothing has changed in what the PSC approved. And if I have the numbers wrong, I apologize. I will get back to you. But I thought they are $200 million in total, 50 in utility-sided solutions, non-traditional utility solutions, and 150 in customer-sided. And you have seen in this first year, when the first year of the BQDM deployment, a significant amount of lighting projects deployed as the first round. One of the reasons you've seen so much of that is it's one of the fastest projects to get going and stood up. As we move through the next couple of years of this, we're going to see more infrastructure-type projects. Those typically had longer timelines, and that's why we didn't see as many of them in the first phase, because lighting does move relatively quickly relative to some of the other potential solutions.
Right, so can you speak to the CHP? I'm sorry to interrupt. The CHP at NYCHA.
CHP at NYCHA. So we have had a number of conversations with NYCHA about what are possible options for NYCHA facilities. And is it possible to install CHP at a NYCHA facility to both improve their efficiency and allow for distributed generation at those facilities? We haven't had a project yet that we've been able to make work, but we continue to talk to them about what some of their options are for NYCHA facilities.
Right, so again, from the conversation I've had, most of the conversations with NYCHA has been about, as it relates to energy efficiency, has been about changing light bulbs. And, it would work wonders to be in the light bulb industry right now if you're anywhere near Brownsville or East New York. But it doesn't speak much to developing a community and an industry for economic development for a particularly low-income neighborhood where we could use that sort of economic stimulus package, and really would just encourage you to consider more options as it relates to the deployment of solar, deployment of CHP, while we will be working on our side as it relates to economic development to help further engage and provide opportunities for training, maintenance, and access to this particular piece of industry. So thank you for your time. I look forward to working with you and discussing further.
Thank you.
So I didn't let you all respond to standby charges as it relates to farm waste. So I just, I wondered if you had any, anything to add, or whether Con Edison's description of how they would set a standby rate for CHP would be similar to how you would set one for, farm waste.
I guess I'll have to admit I'm not the expert in standby charges. I think the description that Con Ed gave as far as how they're crafted is accurate. I do know that we stand ready to work with the PSC in the effort they have, to look at those standby charges and make sure that we reach something that is equitable for all the customers on the system.
Thank you. Okay, so then we don't have to read. Yeah. So next, thank you so much. Yeah, we're good. Next is the Farm Waste Electric Generating Panel with Rick Zimmerman from Zimmerman Associates and Neil Rejman from a dairy farmer from Cayuga County.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Please proceed.
Hello and good day, Chairman Pullen and Chairman Schimminger and members of the Assembly Committee. My name is Neil Raymond. My father, my brother, and I own and operate a 4,000 cow dairy farm in Cayuga County, which is about 20 miles north of Ithaca. We're a third-generation family farm employing 63 people and farming about 6,000 acres, and we currently produce about 1 megawatt of electricity. I also serve as the chairman of the New York State Cow Power Coalition, a group of 24 farmers who own and operate anaerobic digesters and net meter the power onto the grid. Collectively, we produce, we're currently up to about 7 megawatts of electricity collectively, and that's actually production, not capacity. We do have the capacity to double the production and may do so given the production cap has recently increased to 2 megawatt per farm. Thank you for your leadership and support on this budget provision. I'd also like to thank you for having this hearing in New York City. It's always a great excuse to come here. And thanks for having it on a rainy day, so I'm not anxious about being home planting corn. It's often said that farmers were the first environmentalists, and I believe this statement. Farming is all about employing soil, air, light, and water to produce food, fiber, and fuel in a manner that is environmentally sustainable. We cannot control Mother Nature, but we can control the ecosystem, which is our farm. We have learned to do this by using our natural resources to create products for the society and minimize environmental impacts. In fact, through anaerobic digestion, our manure can maximize the nutrient balance of our farms, recycle the fiber, eliminate odors, and destroy carbon, which is 30 to 34 times more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. The anaerobic digester and generators, we call them ADGs, enables our dairy to create a more efficient and more environmentally friendly ecosystem and to produce sufficient electricity to serve our needs, as well as to net meter green power energy onto the grid. In fact, like on our farm, about 2/3 of our power that we produce is net metered and net extra back onto the grid. Anaerobic digestion is a series of biological processes in which microorganisms break down biodegradable materials in the absence of oxygen to create that material to generate biogas. In our case, the biogas is about 60% methane, and it can be used to power generators and create electricity. The biodegradable nature of the anaerobic digester is from manure. However, many other farms generate take in food waste and other organic substrates. Anaerobic digesters generate the greenest, most stable, and most reliable baseload energy of any renewable energy systems in the world. I'm sure all renewables say that, but we believe it. We don't just supplant fossil fuel-produced energy on sunny and windy days. We actually make the environment better 24 hours, 365 days a year. Our digester, we're 95 to 98% productive based on our capacity, which is pretty unique for green power. Experts estimate that more than 100 New York dairy farms would be viable sites for anaerobic digesters, and it's quite conceivable that more than 50 megawatts of green power can be generated in New York. I personally think that number is low. Our farm alone is approaching 1.3 now with the cap, and if we bring in some food waste, we can get up to 2 megawatts. So I think that 50 megawatts is a low number. We welcome the opportunity to engage in the REV and to assist in setting the stage for supportive public policy climate for ADGs. Unfortunately, despite all these positive attributes, the installation and operation of ADGs has not advanced in New York as it has in Western Europe and many other dairy-supportive, renewable energy-friendly states. The following are some of the legal, regulatory, and tariff issues that have discouraged our farm from increasing generation and discouraged other dairy farmers from installing ADGs. Now, there's two main areas: interconnection issues and then net metering. The first one we'll talk about is interconnect issues. Farmer energy generators currently shoulder the full burden of grid upgrades that will likely serve other generators and energy consumers for years to come. Our experience has taught us that the interconnect costs can amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars per dairy farm and can be fraught with expensive time, confusion, and inconsistent guidance from the utility. As distributed energy generators, we know that connecting to the grid to feed power back into the system that was never intended to receive power in this manner can require costly upgrades. We understand that. The question becomes, who should be responsible for investing in the upgrade of the electrical grid? The current rules of engagement are disproportionately one-sided against on-farm ADGs and create a tremendous hurdle for new generation facilities. As an example, the current rules, as approved by the PSC, require that any on-farm ADG producing greater than 20% of the current capacity of the power line must pay for the infrastructure upgrade back to the local substation or high voltage supply line. This rule virtually guarantees that most all ADGs are faced with significant electric grid updates due to the fact that the grid was not kept pace with the demand growth and the potential for distributed energy resources. Also the fact that we live out in the middle of the country where the land is and where the cows are, and relatively small electric infrastructure. Farmers in our coalition have invested as much as $300,000 to successfully interconnect to the grid. In addition, farmers have been fraught with time-consuming hurdles that leaves them seriously questioning the overall worth of investing in an ADG. We offer the following recommendations for improving the interconnect process. The interconnect process should be as uniform as possible within the utility service areas and across the grid. Our experience has demonstrated a complete lack of uniformity between utilities and within utilities working with on-farm anaerobic digesters. We recommend the following for this. The cost burden of upgrading the utility grid should be borne by the utilities and thus the ratepayers. On-farm ADGs are base load source for the greenest electric power found in the state, and we are willing to provide this service to achieve a broader public goal of 50% renewable energy by 2030. However, we will not attract new entrants into the green power sector if farmers continue to face the overwhelming interconnection burden. Each utility should have a crew dedicated to distributed energy resources, interconnects, specifically on-farm anaerobic digester generators. Our experience has demonstrated that there are too many people and opinions within a utility, particularly if a utility is divided into somewhat autonomous subregions. Therefore, the interconnect recommendations and decisions are inconsistent in time and cost. Part of this is because there's so few of us and they're all relatively big projects. So each time we come forward, it's new to the utility. The PSC should dedicate an individual to be the point person. I changed point person because I have a hard time pronouncing this word too. Ombudsman. Yep. Theoretically, the service can complement the uniformity effort. It's exciting to see that this was also recommended by everybody else. Interconnect policies and procedures should be uniform across all renewable energy platforms. It appears that solar and wind installations may be treated differently when it comes to connecting with the grid. Recently, the changing of the cap from 1 to 2 megawatt was an example. The interconnection process should be transparent. Currently, the lack of transparency provides no ability to understand if uniformity is being applied and thus no ability to determine if costs are justified. We recommend the deployment of a web portal for handling the interconnect process elements. Such a portal can help bring light to the process. It's also very exciting to see that that's being done. So that was new to us. The coordinated electrical system analysis should be valid for a longer period of time. The study is required to determine if and how the grid should be upgraded and accommodate the power volume anticipated by the new ADG. Frequently, the analysis expires before the ADG project is completed and thus must be redone at considerable expense. ADG projects can take up to a year or two. They're huge, overwhelming projects for a farm. We recommend that the CESIR be valid until the project is completed or until there is a change in the transmission lines or substation. Further, we recommend that the costs be rebated back to the farmer if the project goes forward to completion. One addition we just added to it was also the whole conversation about the demand and standby rates are not understood, they're not clear, and they're not transparent. We've recently did a study amongst 4 or 5 of us comparing our true-ups, and we can't figure it out. It's very complicated, and I think the utilities struggle with it as well. Net metering is the second big area. Now, we believe that the net metering should not be the exclusive mechanism for dairy farm recompense for ADG energy fed into the grid. We have much to say about this topic, and I won't repeat all the comments and recommendations here today, but would quickly note that the net metering treats every kilowatt fed back into the grid as if it came from an equally environmentally beneficial, equally consistent generation vehicle, and equally economically significant source. This is bad energy and environmental policy. we recommend the following to the Public Service Commission under the Clean Energy Standard proceeding. First, to authorize the aggregation of dairy farm ADG generated energy within a utility service area and perhaps statewide, and to permit the marketing of such power as cow power energy. Successful models for such a market in other dairy states suggest that the viable market exists elsewhere and could readily be tapped in New York. B, through such an aggregated market or via negotiated contractual relationships, the PSC could incent, enable, and facilitate long-term power purchase agreements that would encourage continuing the operation of existing ADGs, increased capital investment, and expansion of existing ADGs, and make the installation of new ADGs more economically viable. Next, to restore fairness and equity to all farm-based ADG operations through sunsetting NYSERDA ownership and control of all dairy farm ADG renewable energy credits. Almost all of us, or I think all of us, of the dairy farm ADGs in New York have operated in good faith and sometimes with marginal economic viability, regardless of when and how much assistance any of the PEN 2828 grant afforded them. So NYSERDA grants were part of all of our constructions. I guess this is what we're getting at. And the legacy ADGs cannot remain economically viable without the ability to market the renewable energy credits. There's a lot of confusion about how the RECs are tied up with NYSERDA. And then lastly, on this one, as any fair evolving renewable energy policy in New York must monetize the following elements and factor the respective values to recompense ADG power. First, the load reduction in which is inherent in self-sustaining energy generating environment of the ADG dairy farm. Second, the potential for line loss avoidance in relation to aggregated ADG energy production transmission. And third, the significant environmental attributes which far exceed those of other renewable energy sources. Appendix A, which is included, outlines the many environmental attributes of the ADG. We call to your attention the data that was submitted through the comments on the PSC proposal on an interim successor to net metering. With assistance from Cornell University, we laid out arguments demonstrating the relative quantities and values of several environmental attributes delivered by ADG power. We strongly believe that such attributes must be included in future recompense for existing and future on-farm ADGs to sustain the existing digester industry and incent future growth. New York's dairy industry offers a tremendous package of benefits that will significantly assist in achieving the state's 50% renewable energy goal. Through the structuring of thoughtful public policy, this source of green power can be tremendous benefit to growing, thriving dairy industry. States in which utilities and anaerobic digesters have worked together have maximized the installations and operations of ADGs. The public service agencies, the utilities, and the dairy farmers in the states of Vermont and Wisconsin have worked diligently and collaboratively to create stable, long-term purchase agreements which can be mutually beneficial. While reforming an energy vision and getting to a 50% renewable energy by 2030 are admirable long-term goals, dairy farms in New York can only look at what is currently happening in the ADG energy markets in the rest of the world and in the United States and wonder when New York State will catch up. In the interim, citizens concerned about the greenhouse gas emissions, dairy farmers who may no longer be able to viably operate the ADGs, and those dairy farmers and others contemplating the installation and operations of ADGs are waiting anxiously for change in New York State. I'm excited that the previous testimonies mirror our concerns. It's shockingly similar in a lot of ways, and that everyone acknowledges very similar problems. This is very exciting. It's a great start to find mutual solutions. I want to thank you for the opportunity to present statements and be happy to answer any and all questions.